The wound that keeps choosing the same hands. It never looks the same at first. Different eyes, different laugh, different way of pulling you in. Maybe gentler this time, maybe rougher. Maybe he comes wrapped in silence, mystery, charm. Maybe he comes loud, confident, and promising protection. But it's not the packaging that matters. It's the ache you feel when you're with him. Not immediately. No. In the beginning, there's a strange comfort. He says the right things. He doesn't feel like a stranger. You don't even flinch when he breaks small boundaries. Because somehow, you've been here before. Not with him, but with this energy, this dynamic. This unspoken understanding that somehow, you're the one who's going to have to earn love again. This is how the wound chooses. Not consciously. You don't wake up saying, "I'd like to be hurt again." But your nervous system knows what feels familiar. And when you've been conditioned, by childhood, by chaos, by coldness, to equate inconsistency with connection, safety feels boring and danger feels like home. The first sign is always in the nervous system. That flutter in your chest when he texts back 3 hours later like nothing happened. That dizzy thrill when he tells you he doesn't usually open up, but he's making an exception for you. That quick forgiveness you give when he raises his voice. Because he didn't mean it, and you understand him. But what you're really understanding is your own unhealed longing. People say trauma bonds are built in chaos, but more often, they're built in recognition. Not of the person in front of you, but of the wound inside you that's still waiting to be chosen, without needing to bleed first. And so you end up with someone who mirrors your earliest emotional wounds. Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because the nervous system chases resolution. And that makes you reach not for what heals, but for what feels like home. It's a heartbreaking truth. We don't always fall in love with people. Sometimes, we fall in love with the possibility of rewriting the past through them. But you can't heal in the same environment that hurt you. And yet we try, over and over, not because we're blind, but because we're wired for hope. The man who hurts you never looks dangerous at first, but the feeling is familiar. And that is your first clue, because your body remembers, even when your mind doesn't. And if you find yourself once again in a place where you're trying to prove you're worthy of being treated well, you are not with love. You are with a pattern. The ache is not in the person. It's in the echo. And the echo always calls back what's unresolved. This is why the same hands keep finding you. Different faces, different voices, same result. Because until you identify the wound, you'll keep choosing the same hands to reopen it, hoping maybe this time they'll hold you instead. But they never do. And the ones who don't, they all had this in common. The mask they always wear in the beginning. You think you're falling for them, but what you're really falling for is a mask. Not the dramatic, obvious kind. Not the cartoon villain version. This mask is crafted with precision. It doesn't lie. It mirrors. It reflects back the version of love you've been searching for. It listens closely, not to understand you, but to learn how to disarm you. Because here's the truth. The people who hurt you the most don't come in shouting. They come in studying. They memorize the contours of your loneliness. They clock the way your eyes light up when you're finally understood. They notice what you apologize for, what you tolerate, what you secretly crave but never ask for out loud. They gather data. Then they reflect it back to you as charm. It starts innocently. He's attentive, interested, present. He calls you his peace. He says he's never met someone like you. He tells you you're different. You're not like the others. You're soft in a world that's made him hard. You feel safe because finally someone sees you. But what you don't realize is he didn't find you. He read you. And the mask he puts on, It's made from your own desires. That's why it feels so real in the beginning. That's why you let your guard down faster than you usually would. That's why you mistake chemistry for connection and urgency for love. He doesn't show you who he is. He shows you what you need. And in doing so, he builds a bond that feels fated. But it's not fate. It's manipulation wearing empathy as camouflage. These are the men who love bomb, but call it passion. Who overstep boundaries, but call it devotion. Who rush the connection, but call it destiny. And the moment you start to trust, the moment you feel yourself exhale and lean in, is the same moment the mask begins to slip. Not all at once, just a flinch, a sharp tone, a small dismissal, a sudden silence after you've said something vulnerable. It's confusing because you remember how warm he was in the beginning, how closely he listened, how deeply he seemed to care. So when the shift happens, you don't recognize it as the truth. You see it as an exception. You tell yourself he's just stressed. You tell yourself you might have overreacted. You give grace, benefit of the doubt, second chances. Because you're not just protecting him. You're protecting the story you built around him. But the mask never slips accidentally. It slips because he no longer needs it. He thinks you're already hooked. And when the mask comes off, he expects you to adjust. And often you do. Not because you're weak, but because the version of him you fell for still lingers in your mind like a ghost. You keep waiting for him to return to who he was. But he never was that person. That version of him was crafted to get you to stay. And now, the game changes. He stops trying. You start overcompensating. He criticizes. You self-reflect. He withdraws. You reach. And slowly, without even noticing, you begin to abandon yourself, trying to win back the version of him who never truly existed. This is what they all have in common. A performance that starts with admiration and ends with emotional erosion. They are not showing you love. They are showing you a character built to bypass your defenses. And by the time you realize it's a mask, you're already mourning someone who was never real. This is how the cycle begins. And the next stage is even more dangerous. Not because of what he does, but because of what you don't say when it first hurts. The moment you feel it, but say nothing. There's always a moment. You don't talk about it. You might not even admit it to yourself. But it happens. Maybe it's something small. The way he interrupts you. The way his eyes narrow when you say no. The slight shift in tone when you speak too freely. Maybe it's how he goes cold for a day after you show him your softest part. Or how he suddenly jokes in a way that doesn't feel like a joke at all. You feel it in your body before your mind catches up. Your stomach tenses. Your shoulders rise. Your chest gets tight. Not from fear, but from confusion. It's too early for this to be happening. You tell yourself not to be dramatic. You rationalize. You want to believe it was a bad moment, a miscommunication, a blip, so you say nothing. And that silence, right there, is the crack where the hurt begins to grow. Because the most dangerous men you'll ever love aren't the ones who scream on day one. They're the ones who shift just enough to make you question yourself. Instead of them, that moment, the one you felt but ignored, was your nervous system trying to warn you. It was your intuition whispering, "This isn't right." But silence feels safer than confrontation. When you've been trained to fear being too much. When you've been taught that love means understanding, not questioning. When the cost of speaking your truth once ended in abandonment. So you downplay. You minimize. You give him grace you've never been given yourself. And that's how it begins. The erosion of your self-trust. Not because he demands it, but because you give it away in tiny pieces. Every time you override your inner alarm. And the more you ignore it, the more it fades. Not the alarm, your ability to hear it. You start walking on eggshells. Even though nothing has been said, you rehearse your messages before sending them. You scan his mood before sharing yours. You shrink, not because he told you to, but because you remember what happened last time you took up space. This is the tactic. Make you silence yourself until you no longer recognize the sound of your own needs. Because once you stop expressing discomfort, he can deny ever causing it. Once you stop questioning him, he can say you're imagining things. Once you stop holding boundaries, he can reshape the relationship to fit his control. And all of this began with one small moment you felt, but didn't name. That's how they all operate. They don't start with destruction. They start with confusion. Because confusion keeps you stuck in self-blame. And self-blame keeps you quiet. So by the time he hurts you outright, you've already learned to question your reality. You've already practiced justifying his behavior. You've already lost your voice. Not because he took it, but because you whispered it away. Slowly, hoping to be loved louder in return. But love doesn't ask you to disappear. And anyone who makes you feel like your clarity is a threat isn't loving you. They're using you, feeding off the benefit of your doubt, hiding behind your empathy, counting on your silence. Because silence is complicity and they know it. That's why they all make you feel like speaking up would ruin everything, because it would ruin their control. This is the shift in every story that ends in heartbreak. The precise moment when you feel the imbalance, the breach, the ache, and say nothing. But if you trace the damage all the way back to its origin, it always begins here. And this is why their patterns become so easy to spot in hindsight. Because once you name it, you can't unsee it. The pattern you can't unsee once it's named. At first, you think it was just him. Just one man who slipped through your intuition. One relationship that turned. One exception. But then you begin to look closer. And you start remembering the others. The way they rushed intimacy. How they always seemed to mirror your soul. How they made you feel chosen at first. Until slowly, you were the one doing all the choosing. You were the one holding space. Justifying tone, chasing clarity, explaining emotions, and shrinking your needs in exchange for temporary peace. It's not until after the pain has passed that you finally see it clearly. This wasn't a one-time heartbreak. It was a pattern. And the worst part? It didn't even start with them. It started earlier. It started with the parent who only gave affection when you behaved a certain way. The caregiver who loved you, but not gently. The household where walking on eggshells was mistaken for maturity. The upbringing where your role was to soothe, to adapt, to survive, not to be deeply seen. So you became hyper-attuned, empathic, attentive, skilled at reading the room before you read yourself. And emotional predators, the ones who leave scars beneath the skin, are drawn to this, not because you're weak, but because your strength is in your silence, your resilience, your loyalty, your ability to carry the emotional weight of two people while asking nothing in return. That's the pattern, not in the men, in what they see in you. They all spot the same light, but not because they want to protect it, because they know how to use it. They all start fast, praise your depth, confide early, say things like, "You're not like the others," present themselves as wounded but trying, make you feel responsible for their healing. They lure you in with intensity, but punish you for needing consistency. They flirt with your empathy, then manipulate it. They reward your patience, then test it again and again, until you confuse endurance for love. They teach you to normalize mixed signals. And once your nervous system is hooked, they start changing the rules. One day he's warm, the next, distant. He gives just enough to keep you hoping. but never enough to feel secure. You begin overanalyzing everything. Was it something I said? Am I asking too much? Am I triggering his past? And that's how it works. The more you question yourself, the less you question him, until the entire relationship becomes a performance, one where you're constantly auditioning for the version of him you met at the start, the one who never existed. This is what they all have in common. They don't just hurt you, they get you to hurt yourself by making you betray your own needs, your own instincts, your own truth, just to stay connected. But the moment you name the pattern, everything changes. Because once you understand how the cycle works, you stop blaming yourself for falling into it. You stop waiting for closure from someone who was never open to begin with. You stop thinking love is something you earn. You begin to see that what felt like love was actually just recognition of pain. And suddenly, all their stories collapse into one. A man who admired your softness, but couldn't hold it. A man who studied your heart, but never honored it. A man who performed love, but disappeared the moment it required presence. And when you finally see it, not just in him, but across all of them, you realize the most powerful thing of all. It was never about how lovable you were. It was about how valuable your silence was to the wrong people. And now that you're awake, you're no longer easy to use. Now the pattern breaks. And what comes next is the truth that frees you. The truth that sets you free and changes everything. There's a moment, and it usually comes quietly. It's not dramatic. It doesn't come with shouting, or closure, or some grand apology that makes everything make sense. No. It comes when you finally sit with the truth. You've been circling for years. They never chose you for your love. They chose you for your tolerance of their inability to love you back. That's the thing they all had in common. It wasn't their charm. It wasn't their pain. It wasn't even their cruelty. It was how comfortable they were using your empathy as a shield from accountability. They saw your softness and thought, "She won't leave the first time I disappoint her." They saw your patience and thought, "She'll try to understand me before she ever questions me." They saw your depth and thought, "She'll stay long enough for me to feel powerful again." Because what they really crave isn't love, it's control. And there's no deeper control than having someone give all their light, while slowly doubting their own worth in the process. You weren't naive. You weren't foolish. You weren't asking for too much. You were just unguarded. And for someone who needs control to feel strong, unguarded is the most vulnerable state of all. So they chipped away at you, little by little, made you second-guess your reactions, laughed when you cried, called your boundaries walls, used your past against you, made you work for closeness, gave you just enough to stay, but never enough to feel secure. And you tried. You tried harder than anyone should have to. Not because you didn't see the truth, but because you saw potential, because you hoped, because you thought maybe this time your love would be enough to teach them how to treat you right. But love doesn't teach people how to be ready, and pain doesn't turn into growth just because you stay through it. What sets you free is the moment. You stop needing the story to have a happy ending and start recognizing that walking away is the ending that saves your life. The truth is, people can't hide their intentions forever. Eventually, the performance cracks, and when it does, you'll see it. The same thread running through every story that ended with you wondering what was wrong with you. But it was never you. It was that one thing they all had in common. They needed someone who wouldn't question their emotional absence. And you stopped being that person. You started asking for more. You started trusting your gut. You started speaking when it hurt. And when you did, they disappeared. Not because you were too much, but because you were finally enough to stop settling. And now you know what to look for. Not just in them, but in yourself. The hesitation you feel when someone gets too close, too fast. The way your body tenses when a boundary is crossed. The subtle urge to explain away your discomfort again. You don't ignore it anymore, because you've seen what happens when you do. That's what healing is. It's not perfection. It's pattern recognition. It's the ability to say, I've been here before, and I know how this ends, and then choose differently. So if you're still carrying shame for not seeing it sooner, let that go. If you're still waiting for an apology, stop. You don't need them to validate your pain for it to be real. The proof is in how you feel now. Calmer, clearer, quieter. Not because you're empty, but because you're no longer fighting for someone to fill you. And if you're still healing, that's okay. Healing doesn't make the past go away. It makes it make sense. And now that it does, if this spoke to something deep in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with the version of you who stayed, with the friend who still can't explain why she's shrinking in a love that doesn't see her, with the people who are just now learning to name the pattern before it repeats. Because the more we speak the truth out loud, the less power it has over us in silence. You are not broken. You are becoming. And this is the beginning.